Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Motivity Care webinar educational series. This is the first one of 2025, and we are really pleased to have with us today Cynthia Perthias. She is a seasoned, recognized expert in the senior care space. She leads the team at Senior Care Authority out of Southwest Florida, but speaks all over the country. We are very honored that she is and her team are partners to Motivity Care because they are not just a referral service. They provide the true needed hands-on assistance to families and seniors who really need to understand the best senior living option for them. They have worked with over 10,000 families since 2018. So we are truly honored, Cynthia, that you're here to share your expertise and help people be a little bit better prepared as we start to look into retirement community options.
Great. Thank you, ma'am. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I think there's a perception sometimes, especially if we've been in senior living spaces like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, maybe not so lovely, linoleum floors, terrible lighting, maybe not the best care, but there has been a lot of change in that whole space. So what are some of the major changes that we need to be aware of?
Sure. So let's think about where we were then. And I always use that as pre 1984. And pre 1984, we were at nursing homes, and that was a hospital model. You shared a room traditionally, and it was like a hospital. You were there for care because we also come from a demographic of people and a population of people. We cared for our families at home. We don't care for our families at home any longer. And after 1984, the word assisted living was really developed during that mid 80s timeframe. And assisted living has grown so much since 1984 that sometimes we kind of refer to them as cruise ships on land.
Hmm.
And they have everything that you could need in that one location. And if you happen to find something that you need that's outside of that location, they'll drive you there. So now we have what's called assisted living, which is assistance to live. And that's an entirely different thing from your grandmother's or your mother's nursing home. The other thing that's coming down the pike in these is that they are being built more and more upscale. And while there's all sorts of bells and whistles within these communities, the most important thing that we always have to think about is what kind of care is there. Just because there is a community that has its own vineyard in the backyard or has the wonderful saltwater pool or has a beautiful chandelier or has a rooftop dining, all of those things are not as important as who is taking care of you and how strong is the care staff. So they're changing every day. I know I just heard about one that is being built down in Florida, and they have a technology that's in the floor that can feed off of a tag that maybe you wear on your shoe that tells if you're beginning to stumble. So if Mim is beginning to stumble, they can read it through the floor, and the care staff can pay more attention to Mim to keep her from stumbling. Those are the types of things that we have there. We have robots who are doing visitation. Those were developed during COVID, and who also are doing FaceTime with families. A lot of technology is coming into play, but at the end of the day, it's how is that care and how is the care staff?
Yeah, can you share just a little bit too about step up communities? Because that's a term that's fairly new and there may be some confusion around that.
So, when I think of step up communities, is that you have the ability to go someplace, and as your decline progresses, or as your decline gets a little bit worse and things get worse, like you begin to fall more, that you would go to a traditionally, in the old days, if you will, you used to have to move someplace else. But now these communities are keeping you through the entire course of your life as you age. And they're allowing you to stay as opposed to stepping up and going someplace else. And that's a really great move for us because us, and I'm speaking about myself personally as a senior citizen in the next couple of weeks, that I want to be able to make a move and stay there for the rest of my life. You and I know, we all know that it doesn't matter if I'm moving next door or if I'm moving around the world, or if I'm moving to another city, or if I'm moving into a community. It's really hard to do and it's very stressful. So we don't want to make a bunch of moves based on our levels of care that we need.
Yeah, I think you make a really strong point. And I think that there are folks out there that say, look, I'm downsizing, I'm still active, I'm still doing things. But a lot of these step up communities where you can come in and you really do have independent living, like it financially might make more sense because you don't necessarily have the same taxes. There are, capital expenses like replacing a roof, other
Mhm.
things. So, it is a very different world than we were in 30 years ago. And I know a number of people, they're not disabled in any way, but they're saying, "Hey, I want to go travel. I don't want to deal with all this. So I want to cut the lawn or do all these other things, but I want to be, to your point, in a community where as I need help as I get older, it's all here for me."
It's there. And so, what you want to think about is that no matter what the community is called, whether they call it independent living or whether they call it assisted living, whatever they call it, you are living as independently as your brain and body will allow you to live. So just because you move to an assisted living doesn't mean that that's it. You're done and you have a couple more years to live. I have clients who live in assisted livings that work full-time jobs,
Mhm.
volunteer every day at the library or with girls that are at-risk girls, or reading to people and tutoring people in communities where maybe they're not getting the right education. So they're still as independent as they can be, but sometimes our bodies begin to kind of break down because that's the machine that we live in. And no matter what we do, our machine is going to break down. We can replace our hips and knees, we cannot replace our brain. So we've got to think about, where can I be where someone can help me when and if I need it. And that's why you want to move to these locations a little bit earlier than you would plan to. And like I said earlier in the discussion, they call them cruise ships on land. I'm not a cruiser, but I do love that idea of having everything at my fingertips that I might possibly need and having someone provide it for me at one cost, one check that I would write.
Right. It makes a lot of sense. So there was a comment, and the question is, would you say the step up care community is the same as a continuing care community?
And I think that's what you're referring to as a continuing care community. Those were called CCRCs, but they don't really use that phrase anymore. The phrase they really use is called a life care plan community. But what that means is that you are paying a sum to be a member of that community. We call them membership fees. Buy-ins is what you used to also hear about it. Those communities are good for people who are really independent. I do an hour-long presentation about CCRCs or life plan communities. What you want to think about is, to be in that type of a community, there are two things that you need to be able to live in that type of a community, to be able to sign up in that type of community. You need money and you need health, because those communities are an insurance plan. And if you were going to get a life insurance plan and they asked you, do you ever parachute? Do you ever skydive? And you could say, yeah, I skydive, I bungee jump, and I smoke cigarettes. You're not getting a life insurance plan. So if you go in to interview with, as you call them, the step up or the life plan communities, if you go to interview with them and they're going to say, how's your money? How's your finances? And you say, you know what? I have enough money to pay into this building, and that's all the money I have left. You're not going to be able to get in. And if you come in and they say, how is your health? And they do really great checks with all of your healthcare providers. And your healthcare provider says, well, they have COPD. She has COPD and she has been diagnosed with dementia. You're not going to be able to get into one of those communities. You have to go into those communities fully healthy and fully wealthy and wise. So healthy, wealthy, and wise get you into one of those communities. So that's why we have other types of communities. They're good for some people. They're not good for everybody.
Right. I think that's really, really important to understand. And yeah, just randomly, because I've also gotten to see some of these newer communities. And you're right. I've seen you can have pets. That didn't happen 30 years ago. They have dog washing rooms. They have multiple restaurants that look just as good as any high class one that you'd want to go out to. So yeah, it's been very interesting for me personally too to see like, wow, I would live here. This is fabulous. Like, I'd love to be, you know.
So let me talk to you about that just a little bit. What we do is we help people find those places. And
Yeah.
when I first got into this business, and I remember doing a tour of a certain brand that had a what they called the bath teak. It was a teak room and it had a walk-in bath, and they would talk about how they would give your mom a massage, and they used lavender oils, and it was so lovely. And remember that the marketing person is really talking to usually the adult daughter, but the adult children is who they're talking to. And at one point I'd seen this bath teak and I thought it was so wonderful, and I thought, oh, I'd live here. I'd love to be in a bath and have somebody massage my hands. And I asked the salesperson, how many baths do you give in the bath teak every day? And she said, I've never seen anyone in the bath teak, and I've been here for 10 years. It's a marketing tool. So the dog washing room might be a marketing tool,
Hmm.
because a lot of people, it sounds kind of cool, but I'm not washing my dog. But I would think it would be kind of cool. So we have to think about those whistles and bells.
Great
I
point.
always think of them as the bath teak that was never used.
Yeah. So that gets to, we see lists, right, that are published about these are the questions you're supposed to ask when you go in there. And I know you and I have had this conversation. So would love to have you share your words of wisdom about the real questions we should be thinking about as
Sure.
we're going in and looking at places. Yeah.
Let me tell you two things that are always on the list that you see if you Google or if somebody gives you a printed out brochure on. These are the questions you should ask. And there are a lot of questions, but there's two that are always on there. And one of them is, what is the staff to patient ratio? And what I'm going to tell you the answer is on that, at every community that you go to, when you ask that question, they're going to tell you that number they're going to tell you a number. And that number is going to be the number that is regulatorily correct. So they're going to say it's one staff to 6 patients or one staff to 8 patients. It depends on what their regulations are. But what is really important is not that number, because they're all going to tell you the right number. No one says, oh, well, ours is one staff to 25 patients. They're not going to tell you that. But what they may also tell you when they tell you 1 to 6 or 1 to 8 is, who are they counting in that staff? Are they counting the person who takes the trash out? Are they counting the guy who drives the van? Are they counting, who are they counting? That's what you want to think about, is the details of those numbers. Another thing that they'll tell you to ask is, what is the longevity of the staff? Because that is a very important question. But traditionally, what they're going to tell you is the person who's been there the longest. Oh, well, Mary over here, Mary, come on in. And they'll bring Mary in, or you meet Mary on a tour because she works there. But they know you're going to ask that question. And so they'll say, Mary, how long have you been here? And Mary will say, I've been here for 25 years. But Mary being there for 25 years is not as important as the average amount of time that the staff has been there, because Mary may have been there 25 years, but John has been there 3 months. They've had turnover. And so really it's about the turnover that you want to understand. And you want to understand, how long has the executive director been there? Because if there have been 4 executive directors in the past year, which is not uncommon, that's a thing that you need to take into account. And that's again why people like I and my business exist, is because we know the nuances of what's there and the questions to ask.
And let's be honest about this. Even if you ask the right question, you don't always get the right answer or the correct answer. And so this is why having expertise, understanding the history of these communities and what it is, and having somebody stand next to you that really knows that can be really vital in terms of making the best choice for you and your family. Now, I know the other thing that comes up a lot with folks is that there are for-profit and not-for-profit communities. So what are the differences? Clear up some of the confusion that we have about that.
things that's a difference is that the not-for-profits may have been around a lot longer because they may have been set up by churches, by religious organizations, by synagogues. Um, so those have been around a lot longer, which sometimes means those not-for-profits are a little bit more dated in their community. However, as far as the general scheme of things, you may be a not-for-profit, but it doesn't mean that you're a not for revenue that exceeds your expenses, because not for profit doesn't mean that you don't make any money. You have to make money to keep these communities going. This is a high expense item of staff and care, and there's a lot of liability to it. So I think that the for profits have gotten a little bit of a short stick lately because we're seeing articles. There's been ones that are running around this week all over the press about the fact that private equity has come in and bought these communities and that it's about the dollar. And in the world we live in, you have to make a living to help people. And so there has to be a financial method in there. And in the not-for-profit, there is a financial method in there of keeping these communities open. Because the not-for-profits are not necessarily started on new, but there are some, for example, in our area where they're expanding their not-for-profit, and it's growing and growing and growing. But they've done a really great job making money so they could stay in business all these years that they've been in business. So I don't see a dramatic difference in a not-for-profit or for-profit. I think it's all about the care. And do you get better care at a not-for-profit? Not necessarily. Do you get better care at a for-profit? Not necessarily. Do you get better care at a certain brand? Not necessarily. It has to do with that actual community, who is running that community, and what the needs of your family are.
Yeah. Well, and I think again, too, we get to, you know, specific needs. So there's budget. There may be religious considerations, spiritual considerations, ethnic considerations, you know, and what specific things are most important to you and your family. And, you know, too often you know, one size fits all definitely does not work in the world.
No.
As decisions. And I think too, you're really getting across the point that, like, you know, too often we wait and we don't think about these things in advance, which kind of dovetails with what you said earlier. You need to understand what your financial position has to be, your financial care plan, which we talked about on earlier webinars, in advance as you're looking at this, so that you can plan for these things. You know, most of the time we wait until the crisis happens and then we're running around, and sometimes that makes it much more difficult to make the best decision. So that kind of leads us into my next question, you know, because I think the big question is, like, you know, okay, how do I find the best option? And in the context of that too, if you could just share a little bit about geographies, and that, you know, there are differences by state sometimes in terms of what's available and how fast these communities are being built. I think that might be helpful.
Yes, you do have to look. If someone, I had a client who came to me the other day, they were 61. The husband and wife were 61. And I thought, really, this is a little too early. But I spoke with them, and for their case, it wasn't too early. They were having some life changes that were going on. They were making decisions around empty nesting. There were a lot of things that they just wanted to have someone that they could talk to about. It could be 15, 20 years before they're moving to any type of other living, but they needed to think about it as they process, because as we get older, 20 years will be gone like that. And so it's really not too early to think about it and to maybe talk to a professional about it. It may be too early to go tour. The 61-year-old couple doesn't need to go tour, because we don't know what it's going to look like in 5 years, much less 10, 15, 20 years. But they wanted to try to get an understanding between someone like me and their financial planner about how the money looks. We also find that as we are in this country, so many people are so concerned about lifespan and longevity and how long can we live? Can we go to 130 years? No, the answer is no. And it goes back to what I said earlier, that you can replace all your joints, but you cannot replace your brain. And we live in bodies that are machines that are going to wear out. I hope I'm not hurting anybody's feelings or scaring you, but we're all going to die. And I think that we are very close. I know. Very
Shocker. Yeah.
close to reaching. Well, I think we're very close to reaching the maximum age that we're going to live.
Yeah.
And there's only so much we can do. There's only so much good health and exercise and medications and medical interventions that we can do, because we really should have made those decisions when we were born, because we needed to choose who our parents were, because genetics is the big thing, right?
Genetics,
But
lifestyle, and just luck of the draw, right?
correct,
You know,
correct.
nobody could have anticipated. I mean, and I mean, like a real example, the guys, men and women that went down after 9/11 in New York City, right? And breathed all that stuff.
Mhm,
And then 10 years, 15 years later got cancer, right? They didn't
mhm,
know that at the time.
mhm.
And so there are things that we have no control over. But I think you make such a strong point. You want more years of independence. You want control over the choices at your life at every age. And even if you can't speak for yourself, you want your wishes carried out. And so,
Mhm.
whether it's for you or a loved one, finding that right solution to how you're going to have more years, hopefully, of health and security, is not something you want to decide at 75 or 80. It
Well,
is,
you not only don't want to decide at 75 or 80, you don't want to decide it in a hospital bed. You don't want to decide it while you're laying on the floor if you've fallen, because balance and falls are very, very common. So we want to make sure that you are that you're making those decisions a lot earlier.
yeah.
So now I see a question. Are you reading the questions?
Yeah, yep, I am. I'm on top of it. Yeah, it was just
Okay.
somebody was commenting about using placement counselors, using real experts to stand by you to do that. And then, at Motivity Care, this is really what we advocate for all the time. Doesn't matter whether it is placement, whether it is a real financial care plan, whether it is understanding long-term care insurance and what other options there are outside of that, transportation, no matter what it is, we can't be experts in every area of this. And no expert in this space is an expert in every area of this. But it's the strength of the network coming
Mhm.
together and being that system. And so again, when you have that in place before the crisis and you've
Mhm.
kind of put this in, aging comes with road bumps. It does, but the difference is that when you have the security and the right information around you, those road bumps don't turn into the roadblocks that we don't want them to become. You
Right.
can ensure that you have a longer period of time, right, to support yourself and
Mhm.
to live that life that you've worked hard for, or giving that independence to the older people that you love. And I think this is the other thing about communities, because I know we run into this, and I know you and I have had this conversation as well. We want to take care of mom or dad at home, and they're still working. And what we don't recognize, you can potentially find a really wonderful living experience for them that is close to where you live. And now you can make sure that they are getting the care they need. You get to see them when you want to see them, but you can also manage your career and keep your own financial stability.
So
And
what we have to think about is the fact that we're in a different world besides the world where our grandparents lived in the back bedroom or in the home behind our home. We are a mobile global society, and we don't live like that any longer. And so while I love my children and I think my children love me, I don't want my children to care for me. And they're in California and in Colorado. And so they have lives and children and jobs. And I have worked really hard during their lives as they were growing up to make sure they had everything they needed to be able to be successful. And now it's their turn to be successful. And it's my turn to really make sure I have a plan that takes care of myself so they can continue to live their lives. It's also something we want to think about. Very few of us were raised or educated to become a 24/7 nurse of a high acuity patient. It's not what we went to school for, and it's not what we were trained to do. We did get a lot of leadership from our parents on how to be good daughters, good sons, good children, good spouses. I mean, if we're looking at that direction, but we did not get training on how to care for someone as they declined. And if we find the right people and put the right teams in place, we can continue to be the good daughter, the good son, the good spouse, and support them in other ways besides the physicality of trying to support somebody who's declining.
Yeah, I think that is very well said. And it's interesting, like sometimes I think of, I mean, declining. It's an interesting word. I mean, it's another, I think that's worth another webinar, how we talk
Mhm.
about that and like talking to older people. There are things that you have to give up, but there are also really wonderful, rich things if you're open to that. It is transition, just like every other stage of life, interestingly enough.
Mhm.
So I think again, all this pre-planning, knowing where you want to go, even going back and before you even retire from your career, right? To really start to think about this. Well, I've saved this money. Where do I want to live? What kind of life do I want to live? What kind of health challenges are in my family? What's going to be best for me? You know, spending that little bit of time and doing that is just so incredibly important. And we are so pleased that you are willing to give free 30-minute consultations to folks just
Mhm.
as a preliminary conversation. We would encourage everybody to really think about that. That is also comes through any Motivity Care client, is entitled to that along with the free financial care review so that you really can start to think about these things before, as you so clearly point out, before the crisis.
And
Um,
I work with a team of people around the country, and all of us, no matter what location we're in, will give you that time with motive you if you're with Motivity Care. It's what we do, and whether you're 61 or 81, we will give you that time to help
or
you
a
get
daughter or
going in
son
the right
that's
direction.
35 that's trying to help mom or dad that might have early
Right.
Alzheimer's, right? So there's, right, or maybe you're just curious, and that's okay too.
Yes, it is. It
To try
is.
and have the best information. Well, we are already, through our 30 minutes here, and I'm sure we could go on for another 30 minutes, but we encourage, thank you for everybody that attended, for those that are listening to the recording. If you would like to get in touch with Cynthia, we can certainly do that and make that connection for you. And through their team that, as she said, is national. Um, it makes such a difference. We want to spend time with the people we love and doing the things that we love, not just doing all this administrative work. And that's the point of having a team around to live that best life. So thank you again, Cynthia.
Huh?
And we want to invite everybody to join us next month, where we are going to have Patty Goldfarb on to talk about all things long-term care insurance. So what is it? When should we be applying for it? What are some of the differences in policies and carriers? And then what happens when you have a problem? Because unfortunately, that sometimes happens too. Um, if you need support, if you are struggling, or if you know someone, please contact us. Motivity Care and all our partners are here to take the complexity out of aging and care management. And we hope all of you have a wonderful day. And if you are in the Northeast and you are looking at this in real time, we hope you stay warm because right now it is pretty cold out there. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.